All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. So in today's presentation, we are diving into the topic around how a hiker can train for descents and downhills. And we're going to be getting into quite a bit of detail around what a hiker can do to make these sections of the trail much more comfortable. So to start with, when it comes down to it, descents, they are just not much fun for a lot of people. Many people experience things like painful knees as a really, really big one, and probably one of the most common issues I hear from hikers on the trail. Other things like jelly legs when you're going down the hills and your legs getting all wobbly and jelly, crushed toes, and a bunch of other things. When it comes down to it, descents can just not be much fun for a lot of people. Now, for some people out there who have access to lots of elevation, lots of mountains, so you may just live near a bunch of mountains and this and that, this may not be so much of an issue for you. Yes, if you have a break from regular hiking, say you've gone through the winter and all of a sudden you started hiking again, the first hike or two, you may really, really struggle with descents. But if you have easy access to elevation, maybe you can just hike more and more and more and eventually it'll get better. But for a lot of people, when it comes down to it, we may want to take this a little bit more seriously. A lot of people maybe don't have access to easy elevation, easy mountains. A lot of people just don't have easy access to that type of things. There's a lot of hikers out there that no matter how much hiking they do, they still find that they really, really struggle on this section. And there's probably a dozen other reasons why some hikers out there may want to take this a little bit more seriously and really consider doing some specific training as opposed to just relying on their hiking and hoping that's going to help. As much as people online love to say, hey, just do more hiking, you'll get better. Sometimes it can be a little bit more complicated than that. So essentially the plan for today is just dive into this subject in a bit of detail and just give you some simple ideas and simple training strategies which can make a bit of a difference here. So what we're going to be covering today is we're going to be diving into some strength training, specifically how that can help with descents. We're going to talk about balance training, some specific cardio training, and how all of this sort of comes into the picture of helping you on steep downhills. Now, to be clear, we won't be covering things like specific workouts or going into full training plans because that's a little bit beyond the scope of this video. This video is going to be long enough already just covering those three things. And yeah, we probably can't get into that stuff so much today. So let's, before we get into all the exercises and all the strategies, let's just kind of cover over why descents are so hard for people, because there are a few different factors which kind of turn into making this section of the trail a little bit harder than it could be looked from the outside. Now, first and foremost is every single step you take downhill puts a hugely disproportionate amount of extra force through the joints. So compared to when you're on the flat, every single step you take downhill puts a huge amount of extra force through the feet, through the ankles, through the knees, through the hips, as they try to stabilize you coming down. Now, on top of that, the muscles themselves work overtime to help stabilize you in these situations. So the calves, the quads, the hamstrings, the glutes, or the adductors, all of these muscles are working a lot to make sure you're not slipping down the hill, to making sure you're stable and making sure you're steady. Now, on top of that is hikers will often reach descents already fatigued after a climb. So typically, obviously going up hills and the going up portion can be really, really fatiguing. And a lot of hikers will get to the top of a hill or get to a top of a climb, and then all of a sudden they'll be faced with a descent, depending on what trail you're doing. And that can make things a little bit trickier because we're already fatigued, we're already sort of struggling for energy, and that can make this a little bit tougher. And on top of that, there's also the added extra mental load of this. A lot of hikers out there, they do have this worry around falling, around slipping, around being unstable. Maybe they've had a bad experience in the past, which has sort of got playing on their mind, or maybe it's just sort of something they struggle with mentally, or whatever it may be. And this in itself, not just is it a mental load, but that also adds an extra physical challenge as well. So, and one thing I didn't mention as well is, adding an extra pack onto the equation of this, whether we're carrying a day pack or a full pack, that's going to add even more force through the joints. And that's also going to challenge our balance because our packs are not always 100% symmetrical or whatever it may be. So ultimately add all of this together and it can add to a serious challenge, and sometimes a lot more of a challenge than a lot of people would first consider when they just think about walking downhill in quotation marks. So with that being said, let's go into strategies around how we can make this a little bit better. Now, ultimately, first and foremost, strength training can be really, really, really beneficial for descents for a few reasons. And I talk about strength training all the time, but specifically looking at descents, it can be really, really beneficial for, number one, building up the muscles which best support your joints on downhills. So a big struggle that a lot of hikers face on descents is they get that knee pain, really, really common. Some people get hip pain or ankle pain. And essentially, if we can build up the muscles that support these joints, we can keep them a bit more comfortable. Strength training can also aid our stability and balance. A big part of developing our muscles can improve our stability and balance just naturally and help us feel a little bit more solid when we're going down. And also, strength training can help reduce fatigue through other sections of the hike. So when we have those steep ascents, when we're just going on a normal day, if we have stronger muscles, this can play a big role in reducing fatigue and helping us feel a bit fresher when we're tackling these descents. Now, ultimately, when it comes down to it, beyond training for descents, just in general, every hiker out there is going to get some really, really good benefits from just developing strength through the entire body. I'm not going to sort of say, hey, if you're looking at descents, you just want to focus on 1, 2, or 3 muscles or anything like that. In all honesty, when it comes to hiking in general, every hiker will get some great benefits from working on things like their quadriceps, their hamstrings, their glutes, their calves, their upper body, their core, and making sure they're holistically working their body. And whether you're specifically struggle with descents or not, whole body training is going to be really beneficial. But beyond this, and beyond just sort of saying, hey, get strong and hey, work on your whole body, there are a few specific tips and a few specific exercises I want to share which can help you hone in on descents a little bit. Now, the first tip when it comes down to this is focusing on what's called eccentric muscle strength. Now, basically what this is when our muscles in the body, they can contract in slightly different ways. Now, what is called an concentric muscle contraction is essentially when your muscle fibers contract while the muscle is shortening. So essentially what we look at here is if you look in the video and you imagine a bicep curl where you're up and down, up and down. Now, a concentric muscle contraction is essentially when the muscle is getting shorter and the muscle's contracting. And essentially that's where a lot of us focus on our strength training. We think, okay, if we're doing a bicep curl when we're lifting the weight up, we think with a squat, okay, the hard portion of a squat is when we're going from the bottom up and we're going on the hard portion. When we're looking at a deadlift, we're thinking, okay, when we're actually lifting the weight off the ground. All of these are known as concentric muscle contractions, which are really, really valuable. Now, on the flip side of things, an eccentric muscle contraction is essentially when a muscle contracts while it's lengthening. So as opposed to the shortening while it's lengthening. So in the bicep curl example, it's basically when you're going back to starting position, the muscle's getting longer, but that muscle is still contracting. Now, essentially, when it comes down to this type of muscle contraction, our muscles will naturally do this, but when it comes to actually training, a lot of hikers out there and a lot of people in general will kind of miss this in their training a little bit. In the sense that a traditional or very, very common way of people going about their strength training is they'll do really quick reps. And I think this comes out from people who maybe have a background in doing group exercise classes or HIIT training where we just do lots and lots and lots of really quick repetitions to kind of get a good burn. But a lot of people, what will happen is if they're doing really quick reps, so they're doing squats and they're like down, up, down, up, down, up, and they're doing it like that, that'll be really, really good to work these concentric muscle contractions, and that'll get a really good burn on the quads and on the muscles, but sometimes it can be missing developing this eccentric muscle strength. And essentially, sometimes if we're not focusing on the lowering portion, it can miss this. Now, the tricky thing here is basically when it comes down to descent, the body and the legs are doing huge amount of work through this eccentric muscle contraction. Every single step we take down, our quads are doing that as we're lowering ourselves down. Our hamstrings are doing that as we're sort of slowly stabilizing ourselves. And yeah, but essentially working on this eccentric muscle strength can go a really, really, really long way of helping him. So basically a really, really, really simple way of helping with descents is when you're looking at your typical strength training, whatever you're doing, ultimately, if you slow your exercises down and slow your repetitions down, it can really, really go a long way. And essentially a simple way of looking at this is taking any exercise you're doing and on the easy part of the exercise. So when you're lowering on a squat or when you're lowering on a deadlift or when you're lowering on a calf raise or anything like that, allow 3 to 5 seconds of that lowering bit. So essentially when we're going on a squat, we'll basically go 1, 2, 3, 4 to the bottom and then 1 second up. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 to the bottom, 1 second up. And do that every single repetition you do. Now, essentially, this is really, really, really valuable because this will train that eccentric muscle strength, which can be really, really beneficial on descents. It's such a simple thing, but can make such a dramatic difference. Now, to give you a few sort of real world examples of this, of how this may look like in your training. This is one simple exercise which puts into action. It's called the eccentric pistol squat, one of my favorites for hikers and specifically to people who struggle on descents. Now, in this particular exercise, what we're doing is we're basically going on one leg. We've got a bench below us and we're holding onto something for support. And essentially what we're doing a really, 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 really slow lower for like 5 to 6 seconds. And then we put both our legs down and then stand up. And the idea behind this is specifically working on that eccentric muscle strength, where we're really, 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 really concentrating on keeping this super slow and controlled, which is super specific for actually going down steep steps or steep hills on the trail. Now, for this particular exercise, if you give this a go, basically the way to make this harder or more difficult for yourself is you can ultimately adjust the box height. So if you do this and you're like, whoa, this is way too hard, then just use a higher chair or a higher box than is demonstrated in this video. Or alternatively, if you're like, this is super easy, then you can use a lower one, and you can keep on making it lower and lower and lower. Or alternatively, if you want to make it a little bit harder, you can put on a bit of weight, put a backpack on your back, hold a dumbbell, something like that. That a really, really simple example of developing this eccentric muscle strength. Now, another example of this is a hamstring curl. So this can be a really good option to kind of work the other sides of the legs. So the pistol squat work the quads, which is the front of the thighs. This hamstring curl works the hamstrings and a little bit of the glutes. So essentially you can do this either with a couple of fitness sliders if you have one of them. If you're training at home, you can do this on a magazine on carpeted floor. So if you put your heels on a couple of magazines and slide along a carpeted floor, that works pretty well. Or alternatively, you can use a towel on a hardwood floor. Or if you're in the gym, you can use an exercise or a Swiss ball, or you could even use just a hamstring curl machine. But essentially what we're looking at here is basically, again, we're really focusing on the slow on the way out. So you start in position, you count 3 or 4 or 5 seconds on the way out, and then pull in. And then 3 or 4 or 5 seconds on the way out, and then pull in. And it's a really, really, really effective way of developing this eccentric hamstring strength, which specifically looking at descents is really relevant for sort of helping you when you're stepping down and sort of preventing the legs from sliding out underneath you. Because a lot of the times when we're on descents, if we take a step, sometimes if the trail isn't 100% smooth, if there's a little rock, there's scree, there's maybe leaves on the trail, our feet will often slide a little bit each step. So we'll step, it'll slide and stabilize, step, slide and stabilize, and do that. And dozens and dozens and hundreds of that can really add up. So this type of stuff can be really beneficial here. So next one we want to talk about, sometimes, the hamstring curl is really, really beneficial. If that's a little bit tricky for some people, another option is doing something like a single-legged deadlift, where basically you can sort of stand on one leg, tipping over at the hips, and basically, again, really focusing on the slow lower here, 4 to 5 seconds on the way down, coming on up. And if you find this a little bit too easy, you can sort of load it up with a dumbbell in one hand or hold a pack with 2 hands, or whatever it may be. So that's an option if the hamstring curls may be just a little bit difficult, a little bit inaccessible for you, or whatever it may be. But hopefully you can kind of see this eccentric muscle strength, just that really, really slow lower, and how that can relate to the downhills. So I won't go too much further into strength training because, we've got a lot more to cover in this video and it's going to be a long one. So ultimately, if you were interested in strength training for hiking and you weren't 100% sure about how to go together, putting together your own workouts, making sure you're covering the whole body and making sure you're really, really honed in the demands of hiking, I do have something for you. Basically, I have a free mini course all about getting started with strength training for hiking. Now, inside this course, you'll dive into the benefits of strength training for hiking. So not just talking about descents, but kind of all the other benefits it brings. It talks about understanding the principles of effective strength training. So a few key principles of how to get the most out of this type of training. And also it'll teach you how to create your own strength workouts for hiking. So it'll give you some templates, some examples. And basically by the end of the course, you'll be able to put together your own strength workouts, which will help your time on the trail. Now, if you did want to sign up for this course, it is completely free. All you need to do is go to summitstrength.com.au/strength-mini-course. That's summitstrength.com.au/strength-mini-course. You can sign up there and get access. So if you're interested in strength training, get your hands on that. Now, with that being said, next up, let's talk about balance training. Now, balance and stability can be really, really important for descents. Because obviously we're stepping. Sometimes we can be a little bit wobbly. Sometimes it can be slidey terrain. We want to make sure we're not tumbling down the hill. Now, specifically when we're looking at balance training, there's a few different aspects of this type of training. Specifically for descents, what I find can be really, really helpful for people is focusing on what's called closed eye balance. So essentially when we're going down hills, we're not always wanting to just completely look at the trail. And we're not always going to be completely looking every single step that we take. Sometimes we'll be looking up to talk to a friend, to look at a bird. And typically these are the types of times when something will go wrong. We'll take a misstep, we'll get a little bit unsteady or whatever it may be. Now, the idea behind closed eye balance is essentially we're teaching and developing the body to be a little bit more balanced, to be a little bit more stable when we're not using the eyes as a visual cue, when we don't actually know where the foot is going. We don't actually know where it is in space, but try to develop that a little bit. There's lots of different ways you can develop balance, but I find this can be really, really useful and really practical. Now, this may sound a little bit complicated. You're like, well, okay, how do I develop my body's ability to balance when I can't actually see? It's really, really simple. Basically, this is a really, really simple little progression scheme that you can kind of fit into some exercises which can help. Now, first and foremost, basically, all you want to do is just practicing standing on one leg with your eyes closed. Do that, give that a go. A lot of people, and probably most people, will get 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds, and that'll be a struggle. So if you can only get 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds, this is where you want to start, and just stand on one leg, close your eyes, hold that, and just resist the balance. And over time, it'll get a little bit better. Now, if you can do that, let's say if you can do that for like 30 seconds quite comfortably, and you're like, you know what, I can get closed eyes on one leg for 30 seconds. That's kind of okay. The next level of progression, then we want to make it a little bit harder. And essentially what you can do, you can stand on one leg, eyes closed, and just stand on a pillow. And essentially what happens with the pillow is it just adds a little extra instability, a little bit extra cushion, and just adds a whole extra struggle to it. So essentially you do that and you practice it a week after week until you can do about 30 seconds with your eyes closed. And then you can add something else. And basically another option, and I'll show you a video example of this in a moment, is standing on one leg on a pillow, and then essentially just getting something like get a water bottle or a weight or just something and just circle it around your waist. So essentially what you're doing, you're not just staying completely static, but basically we're just moving something around the body, and that challenges things quite a bit as well. Then the next challenge is basically you can do the same thing. Stand on one leg, on a pillow, eyes closed, and instead of moving something around your waist, you take your free leg and just kind of tap that around in different directions. And essentially you're just moving that free foot around here and there, just challenging the body in different areas. And you'll find that's really, really struggle. And ultimately, if you can do 30 seconds of that and not fall over with your eyes closed, you're pretty good. But basically, that's a simple progression scheme, which can, in all honesty, probably take you through 6 months of training, because this stuff can be a little bit long to develop. It can be a little bit tedious to develop, but it can be really, really effective. Now, typically when it comes down to balance training, what I usually recommend is just sort of adding it into parts of your day, into your warm-ups, into your rest periods. Because this type of stuff, it's very, very slow to develop. It can be a little bit frustrating. And really just responds to lots and lots and lots of practice. So you kind of just want to put these in little bits and pieces. So in the random parts of your day, examples of this might be when you're waiting for the kettle to boil, or when you're brushing your teeth, or when you're watching the TV and just doing little like 2 minutes here and there. Into your warm-ups, like this can be a great option if you're warming up before a strength session or warming up before a cardio session. Just doing like 2 minutes of this can be good. Or even in your rest periods, if you're doing strength training, the typical way of, strength training is you may do an exercise and rest, and yada, yada, yada. And essentially these balance exercises are a great thing just to put in that rest period, just to use that dead time, or whatever you think. But they're basically some really, really simple options. Now, to give you a couple of video examples, this is an example of that option where I was passing something around the waist. So in this situation, instead of a pillow, I'm on like a mat, which is pretty much the same thing. And essentially I'm on one leg and I'm circling around the waist. Now, in all honesty, most people will struggle with this with their eyes open. So maybe start with this with your eyes open, see how you go. And then once you're kind of feeling a little bit more confident, you can try it with your eyes closed. Very, very simple, but very, very effective. Now, another option is the 3-cone balance. Now, this is one you probably can't really do with your eyes closed, so it can be a nice thing just to sort of complement those other exercises you're doing. But essentially what this is basically you're standing again on a mat or a pillow, or you can do this off the floor. It's a little bit too difficult. You got like 3 cones or just 3 somethings in front of you, and all you're doing is on one leg, just reaching out and touching the other ones. It's very, very, very simple, but you'll notice that you may be wobbling all over the shop. You've got to really, really stabilize to hold yourself, and this can be really beneficial. So this is just another example of sort of balance training. This one may not be super relevant for the eyes closed, but it's a good thing to add in as well. So that's balance. Now let's talk about cardio. Now, basically, when it comes down to it, in general, the more aerobically fit you are, the less fatigue you will accumulate on your hikes and the easier your descents will be. Just as a general rule of thumb, aerobic fitness, the more of that you can have, the more comfortable you're going to feel on your hikes, the less fatigue, the more energy, and the easier the descents will be. Pretty straightforward. Now, basically, when it comes down to it, for a lot of hikers in their training, a lot of hikers will really just get wrapped up in the whole idea of focusing on uphill with their cardio. Because people often think, all right, uphills are the struggle. That's where I get huffed and puffed. That's where I get really tired. And then some people will be like, all right, I'm going to do lots of stuff on the Stairmaster, or maybe the Jacob's ladder, or the step machine, or just do lots and lots of step ups, or whatever it may be. And there's nothing wrong with these things. These can be really good options for training, and they're really valuable for uphills. But if this is kind of where you're focusing the majority of your training, it can leave our descents a little bit undertrained, because as much as the Stairmaster is great for going up, it doesn't really have a downhill portion. Same thing for a treadmill and an incline. So essentially, if you do struggle with going downhill, we kind of want to think, all right, how can we expose the body to these downhills in our training? Now, essentially, to get a little bit more targeted with our cardio, beyond just aerobically getting fit and doing anything you can to just improve your fitness, which is going to help. To get a little bit more targeted, we want to essentially try to fit in some specific exposure to descents in your training somewhere. So trying to expose the body to this particular challenge just somewhere in your week, which isn't just your hiking, but something you can actually do regularly, slowly build up and slowly challenge yourself. Now, ultimately, when it comes down to this, the easiest option is stair or hill sessions. This is kind of the gold standard, which basically involves you just finding a local set of stairs or a local hill. So this is something you're doing outdoors or at least not in the gym, and essentially just going up and down, up and down, up and down. Now, for some people, this may be super easy to find. They may be like, you know what, I have a lovely, nice, long hill nearby. I can go up. It's super steep. That works pretty well. For some people, they may be like, you know what, I can only really access like 10 steps. And that's probably the most amount of elevation I can find somewhere. In all honesty, you're just going to use whatever you've access to. Some people are lucky, some people not so lucky. And essentially what you do is, you just basically start on a session. You say, all right, I'm going to spend 20 minutes going up and down or something like that. And that's literally it. It can be literally as simple as that. Now, basically, with whatever you end up doing, whether you do this for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it may be, a few simple rules of thumb. Over time, as with any type of training, we kind of want to progress this, and we want to make it a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder to make it more challenging on the body. So a few ways to go about this. You could literally just add a little bit extra time each week. So you could just add 5 minutes each week you do. You could start with 15 minutes, then 20 minutes, then 25, then 30, and keep on building up like that. Pretty straightforward. Or you could sort of slowly introduce a bit of pack weight. So you may just do 20 minutes every single week that you do. And first week you do body weight. Next week you do 2 kilos. Next week, 3, 4, 5, and slowly build that up until your actual pack weight for the trail. Or if you have access to lots of options, you could sort of do 4 weeks of doing a relatively short hill, and then 4 weeks doing a set of stairs, and then 4 weeks doing something super long or whatever it may be, and then kind of progress like that. There's lots of different options, but the main thing is just making sure week by week by week, you're making things a little bit more difficult. Now, a few extra tips to get the most out of these workouts. Now, what can be really beneficial when we're looking at any type of stair hill climbing is practicing on the way up, is practicing both quick climbing and slow climbing. Now, quick climbing is basically just getting up the climb as quick as you can, where you get quite huffed and puffed. It's a real big challenge. And this can be a little bit more higher intensity training, which can be really valuable just to push the fitness in a slightly different way, and can be great. Now, on the flip side of that, it can also be really beneficial on these ways up to also practice slow and steady climbing. So actually teaching the body to be a little bit more controlled, a little bit steadier, which is a really valuable skill to learn. That's a really valuable aspect of fitness to develop and get better at. And essentially a really easy way to judge the slow climbing is basically on the way up is climbing at a pace where you can just breathe in and out through the nose, which a lot of people may find surprisingly challenging. And essentially getting a nice mixture of those two, whether you do half the workout quick, half the workout slow, or you do 1 week quick, 1 week slow, or whatever it may be, but getting about exposure to both of those can be really good. Now, on top of that is when we are looking at descents, because obviously we're talking about descents today. You're not trying to rush the descents. You're not trying to rush the downhills. Basically, when you're going down hills on these sessions, take it slow, take it controlled. You don't have to push these. You don't have to stress yourself out on these. Just take it slow and controlled, because we're just trying to expose the body to this challenge. Just get it a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more used to it. We don't have to absolutely, race down the hills. And then if you are loading up your pack, particularly when you're doing these sessions, a really good idea is using water bottles to load up your pack. Now, the idea behind this is when we are doing these stair and hill sessions, and we've got extra weight on the back, one thing that can often happen, as we said before, downhills can put a lot of extra pressure through the joints. And sometimes if we're doing these repeated downhills again and again and again, we can get a little bit uncomfortable. So as opposed to you loading up your pack with like rice or dog food or weights, where you're kind of like, well, if I'm getting sore, I've just got to deal with this and sort of push through it. If you're using water bottles, if you get to the stage where you're like, hey, something's uncomfortable, you can just dump some water out and continue on. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility. I really like this option. And then the final thing to sort of say on this is, if you haven't done this before or haven't done it in a while and you go out and do a stair and hill session, first time you do it, your calves, so lower parts of your legs may get a little bit sore, and they can sometimes get a bit sore for the day or two after, just because those muscles are working a lot and they're quite often undertrained for a lot of people. So if it does happen the first time around, just give it a few days, let it recover, let it chill out. And then typically the second time you do it, it's usually much better. So if it does get sore, don't freak out. It's pretty normal. Now, when it comes down to this, some people are like, hey, should I be doing this 2 or 3 times a week, whatever it may be? Typically for hikers, I just recommend doing this once a week. You don't really need to do multiple stair sessions in a week. I would sort of say if you want to do more training, and probably do want to be doing more training in a week, but do those sessions focusing on other things. Do your strength training, do other forms of cardio, but just keep the stair or hill stuff to maybe once a week. Now, the question as well is, we talked about, okay, stair and hill sessions, very, very valuable, but realistically, what if I have just no access to real stairs or hills? What if I can't even find 10 steps to go up and down? What if I just live in the flattest place in the world, or I'm in the middle of winter, I don't want to go outside, it's dangerous, or whatever it may be? In that situation, realistically, that happens to a lot of people, and I've trained a lot of people in that situation. Realistically, in that situation, you just need to make sure you're nailing your strength training. So you're super consistent, you've got really good workouts, and you're focusing on those key points we talked about before. And making sure you're just nailing your general cardio and your uphill cardio. So if you're doing cardio in the gym, just making sure you're nailing that. Even if you're not getting exposed to those downhills, if you're only doing the ups on the treadmill or only doing the ups on the stair climber, just make sure you're in the best physical shape as you can be. And on top of that is make sure all the other areas of fatigue management are under control. So making sure you're on top of your nutrition, on top of your hydration, you know what you're doing with pacing. So ultimately we can cover all these things you can control, and give yourself the best chance possible. So even if you reach those descents and you're like, hey, actually haven't had a chance to practice the downhill hiking specifically. Okay, my legs are stronger. I'm not super tired because I've gotten to the top of the hill feeling relatively fresh. I've looked after my fatigue through nutrition, hydration, yada, yada, yada. If you can cover the controllable things, then, you'll be in a much better position than if you haven't done any of those things. So ultimately, if you can't get that specific exposure, just do what you can. Now, a few more quick tips before I wrap up this video and before I lose my voice today. If you're not using tracker poles on descents, use them. They make a huge difference, take a huge amount of weight, a huge amount of pressure out of the feet, out of the knees, out of the hips on down hills. Also greatly enhance our stability and our balance. If you're not using them and you struggle on descents, use them. I strongly advocate for them. Number 2 is make sure if you are going on one of those hikes where you just hit that ascent and then straight away you're on the downhill again, at the top, take a second, refuel a little bit. Have a snack at the top of hills. So you're not just going downhill and you're like, I've got no fuel in the tank. I've got no energy. At the top of your climbs, take a second, have a quick snack, refuel, so you can be a bit happier on the downhills. And also, if you ever do feel like going down hills, you start to get a bit anxious. You start to get a little bit stressed out. You're getting really tired. You're worrying and this and that. A couple of simple things you can do with your breathing that can often help. There's a simple strategy called 3 deep breaths, where basically all you do, if you start stressing out, getting a little bit uncomfortable, stop wherever you are. Just take 1 big breath in, hold your breath for a few seconds, big breath out, hold your breath for a few seconds. Do that 3 times. So in, pause, out, pause. Really, really slow, really, really deep. Do that 3 times and then continue on. This is a really, really simple thing that can sometimes just sort of help us mentally, help us just sort of calm down, de-stress, and can sometimes just get us back in the zone. Really, really effective, very, very simple. The other thing you can often look at is if you are going down hills, is just trying to sort of go downhill, focusing on just breathing in and out through the nose. Now, the idea behind that is if we are doing this nose breathing, it basically is just a natural way just to slow the breathing down a little bit. It's not magic like a lot of people talk about online. It's not, I'm not going to do crazy dramatic things to your fitness or to your performance. But in this context, it's going to be really beneficial at just slowing the breathing down, helping you calm down, helping you de-stress, and helping you focus. So if you do feel like things are getting on top of you, 3 deep breaths, nose breathing can go a long way. So summarizing all of this, what we covered today, strength, just get strong. If you're not doing strength training, build up your strength in your legs. It'll go a long way. And also focus on that eccentric muscle strength. So those lowers, making sure you're getting like 4 to 5 seconds on the lowering portion can go a long way. On top of that, work on a bit of balance and proprioception where you can fit that into your week. It's slow to improve, but it can go a long way. And make sure cardio isn't the limiting factor. So making sure that you're not entering these descents absolutely exhausted. If you're not working on just general aerobic fitness in your week, something you definitely want to work on. And also, if you have access to it, get some specific exposure and practice to these descents. Find a hill, find a set of stairs, put that together. And ultimately, if you can put those 4 things together, strength, balance, cardio, and specific exposure, that in itself will not only be amazing for your descents, but it's just general ideas for hiking. That's going to help you dramatically in so many other situations. So very, very simple, but can go a long, long, long way. So hopefully all of this does give you a little bit of an overview around how you can go about your training and hopefully a few insights on how you can specifically train for these descents. But honestly, as with all of these videos, I fully understand if you come to the end of this, you're like, hey, this kind of makes sense, but I still don't know how to put this together. I'm not 100% sure how this all turns into a training week. I'm not sure how to plan that weekend out into a month or into multiple months. And I just want some help with all of this. If you did need a little bit of personalized help, we offer through Summit Strength personalized online training programs for hikers to help them get fit, strong, and resilient for their adventures. Now, what our packages typically cover is we will create a custom and personalized workout program to help you get fit for anything the trail may throw at you. We'll cover strength training, cardio, hiking programming, recovery, mobility, all in a way that's going to be personalized around you, your goals, your situation, and your needs. Now, on top of that, we also do put a big emphasis into education on all the peripheral factors that can make or break an adventure. So things like nutrition, recovery, self-care, mental strength, pain prevention, and a bunch of other things. And also we'll make sure you have the coaching, support, and accountability to keep you on track through all the ups and downs that comes with life, and make sure there's someone in your corner to help you through everything that's going on. Now, if you did want to find out a little bit more, basically you can go to summitstrength.com.au/online. Now, on that page, there's a big video that talks through our program in a bit of detail. And if that does sound like something you would like to get involved with or at least learn a little bit more about, there is a link on that page where you can book a free call with our team. We can sit down, get to know you, learn about your situation, your needs, your hiking. And if it sounds like something we can help you with, we can talk you through one of our packages which may fit into your life. So if you did want to learn a little bit more, go to summitstrength.com.au/online and we can take it from there. But with that being said, I hope this makes sense. I hope this does help a few people with the descents and hope some of these ideas you can put into action and it can make a bit of a difference for your adventures. So with that being said, thank you so much for listening. Hope you have a lovely day and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.